Jaws is a very nostalgic film for me. I think when I was a child, my parents assumed it was okay for me to watch because it was directed by the guy that made E.T. So, fond memories are attached to this movie, unlike this man's leg relative to his body. Get a joke in right at the start, that's the rule. You don't need me to tell you how iconic Jaws is. Its impact on pop culture was and continues to be massive, just like the bite taken out of this man's torso. It also gave me one of my favourite jokes from Peep Show.
I'm going to carry on drinking until they catch Jaws the shark.
The shark isn't called Jaws, Jeremy. The film is called Jaws.
Of course the shark's called Jaws. Here comes Jaws, Jaws the shark. Mind he doesn't bite you with his enormous jaws.
Jaws has also been credited as spawning the shark movie genre, which is basically a creature feature slasher film set in the ocean. They are generally pretty, bad, I guess. And they also rely on perpetuating this concept of sharks equal nasty dickheads, so look out. Although I do believe that 99% of all shark movies, including the sequels to Jaws, belong in this category, Steven Spielberg's original entry does not. Even as a kid, I knew there was something that made the original stand out, and this something is key when trying to understand why the sequels and other shark films don't work. And what is that? What is that something, I hear you say? Spit it out already. Spit it out, just like the shark spat out this man's leg. Well, here's the thing. Jaws isn't really a shark movie.
You got donkey brains.
You're probably getting ready to make several good points down in that comment section, but if you would be so kind, do allow me to explain, good sir. Jaws is set on Amity Island, a seemingly perfect holiday destination with beautiful beaches and a tight-knit community where all the locals are familiar with one another, just like that town in Gilmore Girls. Only, in that show, there is an unfortunate lack of horrific shark attacks happening to certain characters. However, there is also an ugly side to this utopian-esque community, a form of greed and corruption that is only highlighted when an element of chaos is thrust upon the island to upset the established order of things, aka Jaws the shark. The shark attacks put a spotlight on how the mayor and his fellow cronies, in the face of a crisis, prioritise money and superficial gains over the safety and lives of their residents. Sound familiar? After word gets out of Chief Brody's plans to alert the public of the first shark attack, he is essentially ambushed by these town officials and businessmen who force his hand in the most cowardly, seedy way possible.
You yell barracuda. Everybody says, huh? What? You yell shark. We've got a panic on our hands on the 4th of July.
Monetary concerns are placed above literal human lives, and as a result, a child dies. Look at that, this boy has the combined arteries of 7 grown men. Peter Benchley, the author of Jaws, later went on to say that he regretted the negative impact his book had on the perception of sharks, and if he had his time again, he probably wouldn't have written it at all. Yeah, alright, Peter. But I think that the shark is actually pretty interchangeable here, at least in concept. Jaws, the shark, is simply a catalyst to create a mass panic and expose this perfect society for what it really is. This is even more apparent when you realise that every death bar the initial attack was avoidable. The shark only poses a threat because the characters allowed it to by refusing to close their lucrative tourist attractions. And just to comfort Benchley's guilt-ridden conscience here, I feel as though this is even more prominent in the book, because the seedy mayor is actively taking profits produced by the beaches to pay off various debts that he's accumulated. A shark is just a visually iconic and memorable way to execute this concept. This perfectly formed agent of chaos that appears seemingly from nowhere to turn everything on its head. And yeah, okay, the shark is obviously what draws in the crowd and gets people buying popcorn, you calorie-counting sheep. But the reason I and many others return so often to this film is because it's really about Brody and the way the other characters respond to this very extreme situation. Brody goes through a lot of conflict in this film. He is the perfect example of lawful good. His unease and sense of responsibility is communicated really well. You can tell he knows that this is wrong. And when the character is faced with the immediate consequences of his inaction, you can feel his massive sense of guilt without needing any dialogue. And ultimately, it is this uncorrupted good that prevails over the chaos, because Brody is detached from the dark underbelly that is under attack. Our protagonist doesn't roadrunner the shark to death for any ulterior motives. He does it purely because he knows it's his duty and the right thing to do. And I think it's this sense of character and thematic premise that shark movies, including the Jaws sequels, all lack. So let's take a quick peek at them. Jaws 2 is the closest to achieving what I'm talking about here, but that's more to do with the fact that it almost pulled a Hangover 2 and sticks loyally to the original film structure. Most changes are pretty superficial. We introduce this character to be the aggressive roadblock to Brody's goal of shutting down the beaches, and the mayor is reduced to the role of a mostly silent, compliant idiot. And other than that, there's no real conflict for Brody. He is convinced that there's another shark and that they need to deal with it, and he's never really put into a position where he doubts that or goes against what he knows is the correct thing to do. There's an interesting idea they touch upon where he comes across to other characters as paranoid and maybe carrying some trauma from his previous experience with Jaws the shark, but this doesn't really ever weigh on his conscience enough for it to make him doubt himself. There's a scene at the end of the second act where he gets fired from his position as chief of police and he's like, maybe I am just being dumb. But it is very brief, and he is immediately vindicated, so it never really plays into any of his actions. As is common for most sequels, Jaws 2 really tries to up the ante in terms of spectacle, which is where it finds itself slipping into generic shark film territory. Yeah, let's throw in an explosion and give Jaws a cool burn wound on his face. Just like how a lot of shark movies have to think of more extreme and weird circumstances to be like, actually, our shark is the most dangerous of all the sharks in these shark movies. Look at our shark movie is the most epicest. Unlike the original, the film also sets up these teenage boys as horny arseholes, so when they are later noshed on by the shark, it seems semi-justified, like how traditional slasher films had teenagers having sex and smoking drugs to later be punished by some lunatic with a giant knife. Spielberg's film made sure that all of the attacks were very random. The lack of pattern in the victims really enforced this idea of chaos and ultimately made it feel less cynical. Jaws 3D is where the franchise fully accepts itself as a slasher film. The whole setup being in SeaWorld is done purely to distract the audience from the lack of story, like, oh, isn't this a fun environment for a shark to eat people in? Apparently the studio wanted them to somehow bring back the same shark from Jaws 2, you know, the one that burned to death, because they thought that would sell better to audiences. So that in itself is a pretty clear indication that the focus was now entirely on the shark and nothing else. The fact that it is set at SeaWorld probably meant it could have had some fun meta-contextual commentary on the consumer-audience relationship with shark movies, especially since it's 3D. There was room for a lot of fun satire like Gremlins 2 or the Jump Street movies did, but it doesn't really do anything with its own setup. It offers a little else outside of the shark kills, although it did give us all this fantastic sequence. Wow, it's like I can really reach out and feel the disappointment in the movie theaters. Jaws: The Revenge. This is the final sequel and seemingly the most loathed out of the whole bunch, but I don't know. I feel like this comes close to introducing some fresh story elements that pulls focus away from shark schlock without retreading what the original had already done. Yes, the shark apparently going after Brody's family specifically is a little silly, but I think thematically this had a lot of interesting potential. So, Chief Brody died off screen because of a heart attack he had whilst experiencing nightmares about the shark, and I don't hate this idea. It was already set up in Jaws 2 that he was a little paranoid because of the events of the first film, and as tasteless as it was to kill off his youngest son at the start of this movie, I think if you're going to revisit the same characters again, Ellen Brody being haunted by this generational trauma represented by the shark, first attempting to run from it and then confronting it and actually overcoming it, is a pretty cool idea. It's just that this obviously wasn't their intention and the whole thing is executed very poorly. Almost as poorly as this man felt after losing his leg. This film also tried to gaslight us into thinking Jaws 3D never happened. In the third film, Mike, the oldest son, is the engineer at SeaWorld, but in Jaws: The Revenge, he's a marine biologist, and we're kind of made to think that the events of the third film just never happened. Quite a scheme they tried to pull off. Just like the shark pulled off this man. I feel like the failures of the Jaws sequels can be applied to most other shark movies. For me, it's the same reason the Jurassic Park sequels never really came close to the original. All of the subsequent films seem to be retreading familiar ground thematically, and they only ever seem focused on introducing a new, bigger, more epic dinosaur to eat people, instead of developing any interesting characters or fresh ideas. It's just giving its attention to the wrong things. So maybe it's time to let the shark movie genre die. Like, actually die. Not explode or burn and then a new one is waiting to go a year later. I mean, dead in the traditional sense of no longer existing forever. Every time it feels like the genre might be gone for good, something like The Shallows or 47 Meters Down comes along. Admittedly, I haven't seen either of those, but come on, let's just call it a day, yeah? Let the shark stay dead. Alright, that's my mini autopsy of the Jaws franchise. What do you think? Am I trying too hard to distinguish the original from the other entries in the series? Is the main reason it's good more to do with the fact that it was the first of its kind and in the hands of a very competent director? Let me know in the comments down below. As always, thanks for watching, and bye-bye.